Our guest today is president of the American Federation of Teachers. The American Federation of Teachers has 1.6 million members and represents teachers, paraprofessionals, and school-related personnel, higher education faculty and staff, nurses and other healthcare professionals, local, state, and federal government employees, and early childhood educators. Our guest today has devoted her entire life to helping children. She earned her degrees from Cornell University's School of Industrial and Labor Relations and the Cardozo School of Law. Ladies and gentlemen, Randi Weingarten. Randi?
Thanks, Karen. Karen Lewis does call me Mom, and that is not an April Fool's joke. So, I want to thank Jay. I started saying, who comes to the City Club of Chicago on April Fools? But I wanted to thank Jay. We were just spending some time talking about Senator Edward Kennedy and the center that just opened this weekend in Boston, in Massachusetts. And, every day I kind of miss what Senator Kennedy did in terms of not just the soaring rhetoric, but always being able to take that rhetoric and to move it into policy. And so, Jay, it's great to see you. It's great to see what you're doing here. And it's great to see that you're doing that in kind of Senator Kennedy's legacy. Thank you. So I know there's been a whole bunch of people who have spoken at the City Club of Chicago. And there's an expectation, even though it's April Fool's, that I come here today to talk about uphill battles and long odds. But frankly, since you had Tom Ricketts here last week, I assume the topic had already been covered, at least as it pertains to the Cubs. But this club has had no shortage of conversations about the children of this city and the children of our country. Ellen Alberding to Arnie Duncan, Barbara Byrd Bennett to my colleague and sister, Karen Lewis, and Dan Montgomery. Mayor Emanuel, right? That's his name. And Chuy Garcia. But while these conversations that are hosted here are civil, they're thoughtful, they're enlightening, when they move from this stage to our schools, to the outside world, they become politicized, contentious, and I would argue, counterproductive. And believe me, I get it. The stakes are incredibly high, both here and everywhere in the country. But the level of contention sets us back tremendously. It makes the more than 350,000 children currently enrolled in CPS pawns in a political battle instead of making them the sole focus of our efforts. And it makes our children's future a political question when there are so many elements of what children need that should be above, beyond, and outside the realm of politics. But since the education of this city's children has in many ways become a political question, and one of the defining questions in this mayoral election, I have to speak for a moment about that. All of us remember the 2012 teacher strike. And while the media focused on money and teacher evaluation, I would argue, if you talk to any teacher or parent, you would have seen this too, that it was really a proxy fight between two very different philosophies. One philosophy revolved around the importance of public education and fighting for the investments necessary to nurture the whole child, each and every one. To us, schooling, and when I say us, I'm talking about our whole union, CTU, IFT, AFT. To us, schooling is about more than developing skills, as important as that is. It's about promoting pluralism, the love of learning, preparing students to be citizens of the world, and for college work and life. Schools themselves are more than just places where learning takes place. They're hubs of the community, as we just talked about. And in that context, we're responsible for doing more than saving our neighborhood schools. Good neighborhood schools are irreplaceable institutions. The glue that stabilizes our communities and that secures our social compact. Mayor Emanuel embraced a different philosophy, one that elevated competition, one that created winners and losers, one that divested, not invested, one that shut down neighborhood public schools rather than building them up. Take Walter H. Diet High School, which I just was at this morning, or outside of this morning. In 2012, it was slated for closure. Before that, the school faced so many cuts that students took art and physical education classes online. Physical education classes online. And it had no money to create AP classes. The school's closure means that children who don't go to charters will need to be bused to other neighborhoods. Frankly, we also saw that with the closure of another school that we saw today, where kids are bused 3 miles instead of right across the street to the elementary school. And when the final trickle of 13 kids graduate from Diet this year, of course we'll celebrate them. But we mourn the fact that their neighborhood will be left without a single traditional public high school. And of course, Diet, as I just said, is far from alone. 50 other schools have been closed. Closure after closure after closure. Neighborhood after neighborhood after neighborhood. And a city with a lot of fiscal issues, closing down neighborhood schools is much more expensive than previously thought. And it's led to overcrowding, and according to education researchers at UIC, it distorts and disorients students, and it disconnects parents. Their words, not mine. 17-year-old Parrish Brown, a 2013 graduate of Diet, said it best, and I quote him, "They closed my elementary school, and now they're phasing out my high school. One day, there'll be nothing in my community to come back to." And the more stories you hear like that, my friends, the better you understand why 60% of the residents of neighborhoods that lost schools voted against the sitting mayor, and that 90% voted for an elected school board. Now, why do I go through this? This is not part of a debating society where some people in the room clap for it and some people in the room are sitting stoic. But it's part of why our union has supported Chuy Garcia. He understands that we educate kids in the context of community, in the framework of neighborhood, not in a vacuum. He knows that the key to success to a strengthened neighborhood, the key to success for kids and to account for all of this stuff is when you actually create schools as center of communities with wraparound services. He understands that we need to strengthen neighborhood schools and situate them in an ecosystem of support, including economic development and public safety. And he understands when it comes to making tough choices, communities are not our enemy. They need to be our partners. And Chuy understands that it's hard to plant the seeds of the future when the way you campaign or the way you govern leaves nothing but scorched earth. Look, I couldn't say it any better. I love this woman. She is my sister in struggle. But when Karen recently said, and I quote, "Chuy will focus on our neglected neighborhoods, restore fairness to the tax system, negotiate humanly with our public servants, and reset our collective priorities to help all Chicagoans, but especially those who are most in need. Without him, our city will become more separate and more unequal. Frankly, the fact is, when this talk was scheduled, the conventional wisdom was that I'd be speaking after the close of a mayoral election, not before the final stretch of a runoff. But the fact that we're here a week out from an unprecedented mayoral runoff is very telling. And a New Yorker doesn't have to tell you what's at stake next week. But even more is what's at stake beyond next week. Remember, the education of a child from kindergarten to 12th grade is 3 times as long as a mayoral run. So while in 1 week, one candidate will be able to claim victory, we all need to start the process of reclaiming the promise of public education. And this is not just a Chicago issue. It's not just an education issue. It's a conversation, though, that's actually happening all across the country. So for instance, last month, I was honored to participate in a panel discussion hosted by the Center for American Progress with former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and AFSCME President Lee Saunders, amongst others. Bruce Katz, who runs the Metropolitan Policy Program at Brookings, made a powerful case for the fact that schools can't just be islands, even if they're islands of excellence. They're inextricably linked to the success of urban centers, to investments in economic development, transportation, and infrastructure. And then Glenn Hutchins, who founded Silver Lake Partners, a private equity firm, and sits on the board of the New York Fed. So, no soft liberal here, gave a compelling analysis of the recent histories of Pittsburgh and Detroit. The cities had parallel experiences of seeing the decline of a major industry and then everything that followed from that. And he asked the audience in the panel, he said, what led Pittsburgh to being named as the most livable city in the United States in 2009 at a time when Detroit was still in massive decline? His conclusion? Collaboration over contention. His words, not mine. In Pittsburgh, business, labor, university, and governments, or universities and the government, came together to invest in education, medical centers, preservation projects to drive growth. Yes, they had gentrification, but they did it in a very planned way. In Detroit, the opposite was true up until now, when we're starting to see the seeds of collaboration. The takeaway was clear for cities that are increasingly returning to their role as this country's economic engine. We must collaborate to compete for our cities, our schools, our economy, and our children to thrive. So how do we undertake that collaborative process of reclaiming the promise of public education? Some of you have heard me say a few of these things before. Some of you know this from your own experience. It starts with working with communities and investing in strategies that will help children succeed. High-quality early childhood education is one such strategy. Every dollar spent on early childhood programs returns up to $11 in economic benefits. Your own Nobel laureate, University of Chicago professor James Heckman, has been a leading voice in this and in the benefits of early childhood education, particularly its ability to level the playing field for disadvantaged children. It continues with working to create and maintain welcoming, safe, collaborative public schools with engaging curriculum that include art, music, civics, and sciences, taught by teachers who are well prepared and well supported and have time to collaborate. And on that score, one thing, maybe not even in this room, that Chicagoans may not even know, is that for 18 years, CTU, with CPS, have been helping its teachers achieve the highest credential teachers can earn in the United States of America, certification by the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards. Today, there are 2,200 nationally board certified teachers in Chicago, including CTU's own president, Karen Lewis. This, my friends, is the largest program of its kind in any big city in the country. Did I get that right, Lynn? any big city in the country. So look, these are teachers who demonstrate that they are masters of their craft, who mentor, who support other teachers, and they're exemplars of our profession. But even they can't do it alone. And we're still faced with this mythology that the only thing that affects a student's performance is the effort and talent of a teacher. Look, I've said many times, I've said it in front of 3,000 of my own members in convention after convention. If someone can't teach after they've been prepared and supported, they shouldn't be in our profession. But when economists are now telling us that teachers, as important a role as they play, ultimately account for 10% of the variance in student achievement, then we need to focus on the other 90%. So, reclaiming the promise also includes multiple pathways to graduation, including career and tech education, which we call CTE. These programs give kids hands-on experience that prepare them for a competitive job market. I'm talking about offerings like Chicago's Simeon Career Academy, that partnership with the IBEW Local 134. These students have a clear pathway from training to employment. And it's not just that one school. We should be looking at ways to continue building these and similar programs. So take the Peoria Pathways to Prosperity Initiative, PP2P. Say that 5 times fast. This is a project of Peoria's public schools, the local Chamber of Commerce, the local CEO Council, Workforce Alliance, the local CLC, and several other organizations that help connect students to work-based learning, on-the-job training experiences, and help teachers tailor their instruction. Models like this, frankly, can help stretch the magnificent mile into a magnificent metropolis. If you want to get excellence on more than an ad hoc, Herculean, or random basis, it requires wraparound services. It requires focusing on the other 90%, where students and their families have access to health care, childcare, workforce development, recreational centers, and other emotional and social supports. Together, we can make that happen, and I mean all of us together. And let me give you an example of how. For a sense of what's possible in Chicago, let me first take you to a place in West Virginia called McDowell County. McDowell was once a thriving coal mining community, but today it's the 8th poorest county in the nation. People are geographically and financially cut off from healthcare, social services, transportation, and housing. In 2012, nearly 1,000 students in McDowell were classified as homeless. For families with children, the poverty rate hovers around 41%. Only half the residents in McDowell have a high school degree. More than 76% of its students, compared with 25% nationally, score below proficient in math. Students are bused long distances to schools, and there's virtually no affordable housing. Like elsewhere in the nation, educational challenges are inextricably linked to economic ones. In a county so disconnected, the problems are very connected. From here, McDowell County, as rural as it seems, more than 600 miles away, seems like a world away. But in truth, it's really only blocks away. Though parts of Kenwood are experiencing an upswing, the North Kenwood Oakland community on the south side of Chicago is more of a mirror of McDowell County than most of us would like to imagine. Once a community with a thriving middle class, home to icons like Ida B. Wells, Nat King Cole, Red Fox. When the manufacturing and factory jobs left, the social fabric started to tear. Today, 1 in 4 residents are unemployed. 1 in 5 students, or 1 in 5 adults in Oakland, have no high school diploma. There's been an increase in crime and a loss of thousands of units of affordable housing. There's a lack of adequate health care and not enough support for after-school programs, with very few constructive places for young people to congregate. There's been, in short, a wholesale disinvestment from the community. And it's not the result of one mayor or one decision, but the aggregate effect. The aggregate effect is that the place, just minutes from downtown Chicago, 15 minutes from there to here, driving this afternoon or this morning. It's minutes from downtown Chicago, but it's largely disconnected from downtown. So here's what we did in McDowell. Starting in 2011, the AFT, working hand in hand with our state affiliate, AFT West Virginia, and former First Lady Gail Manchin, led the effort to revitalize the county by forming a partnership which now involves 100 organizations, companies, and unions. And we call it Reconnect McDowell, Reconnecting McDowell, actually. We knew that if we wanted to improve schools and boost student achievement, we had to focus as well on the unmet needs of the residents in McDowell. And that's why a big part of the effort includes expanding schools into community centers that will give people access to services they so desperately need. So let me give you a couple of examples. Working with Chantal, a telecom company in the region, we were able to bring full broadband access, internet access, to about 10,000 households. Working with the governor, Federal Economic Development Agency, and Connect to Compete, we secured free laptops for every middle school student. Working with the state's oral health service, we created a mobile dental clinic pilot to give students, starting with pre-kindergartens, the oral examinations they need so that toothaches and cavities don't result in higher absentee rates and lower achievement. And now, we're building housing for teachers, a Renaissance village, because of the terribly high teacher turnover and vacancy in the housing. So that is my point, my friends, as I close. This morning, we spent some time in North Kenwood, Oakland, with Juwanza Malone, the executive director of the Kenwood Oakland Community Organization, Jitu Brown, president or the director of Journey for Justice, and Jesse Sharkey, CTU's vice president. COCO, as you know, is the oldest African-American community organization in the city of Chicago. It's their 50th year, and it's great to see Reverend Jackson here, one of their founders. So they are working small miracles every day. But what if, like we're doing at McDowell, neighborhood, community organizations, labor, and business can create some big miracles by seeding real and broad partnerships? What if we start supporting the COCO Grow Your Own Teachers program? What if we come up with new ways to preserve and construct affordable housing? What if we develop an ecosystem of support, including economic development and public safety? What if, instead of diet closing, it becomes a sustainable community center, complete with a youth center? Imagine if our kids are more than test scores, what will happen and how we will soar. So that's why today, CTU, AFT, and COCO have made this initial commitment to start this kind of partnership like Reconnecting McDowell. And we hope that many of you in this room will join us, and we will turn that into a robust, vibrant, and community-driven initiative. So let me leave you with this. As both a history teacher and a union president, I'm supposed to talk to you about elections. But elections should be about connecting the aspirations of people to the opportunities of the future. We often talk about the ladder of opportunity. I like that analogy because I think of the things that are essential to it: health and housing, dignity and rights, education and good jobs, all forming rungs on that ladder. But the more I think about it, the more I've come to see that ladder as one of the ladders you see on fire escapes here in Chicago, a retractable ladder. One that if someone climbs up, they have the affirmative obligation to hold it down for the next person, or it will retract and spring out of reach. So, my friends, after the votes are counted, after the ads disappear, Work with us to reclaim the promise of public education. Work with us on this Kenwood-Oakland partnership. Let's turn the focus from closing schools to improving them. Let's turn the focus from abandoning our communities to revitalizing them. Let's collaborate to compete. Thank you very much.
Well done, well done. If we have any questions, pardon my socks got stuck here. Any questions? We have our little, where are they?
None on the cups, though, okay?
They're moving around. A lot of movement. All right. I know, Karen, but you'll like this, right? Here we go. This is what the City Club's all about. You ready? First question from Jesse Ruiz. Great round of applause for you, Jesse. I hope you don't take it too seriously. Thoughts on Chicago's implementation of a longer day, school day? And we have to add this one. Reaction to Mayor de Blasio calling for mayoral control of New York schools. Two pretty tough questions.
Actually, what's happening is that Mayor de Blasio is doing mayoral control in a way that cedes authority to local communities throughout the city. And when I say cede, I mean S-E-E-D, as opposed to C-E-D-E. And frankly, the only people that are opposed to it, people want it to be different, but you do not see this wholesale opposition to mayoral control in New York City anymore, because the mayor believes he is the mayor of all people. And he actually focuses on doing the kinds of things and walking the walk of all communities. And so that's why you don't see the kind of fight that even 4 years ago you saw about it. And in fact, the people who are opposing it are the very people who pushed to give Bloomberg mayoral control. So why is it that people who are actually funded by, well, let me say it this way. Why is it that people who fought to give the Republican billionaire control of the schools don't want to give the Democratic progressive that same kind of control? And you see it, frankly, in terms of the whole issue about charters, where all of a sudden the Democratic progressive no longer has the right to actually try to figure out if a school with special needs children should actually be able to grow, or should it be given to someone who actually has lots of connections. And that's what's happening. It's different in terms of New York, but what you're seeing is you also saw, before de Blasio got elected, and look, he's a friend of mine, colleague, you also saw that in New York, just like in Philadelphia, just like in Chicago, there was a real rebuke of the former policies, because they were top-down and market-driven. And what de Blasio is trying to do in New York is to try to say, let's create something where there's an alignment, but let's also make sure the voice of people are heard and are respected. On the issue of longer day, there's lots of examples of longer day throughout the country, and the real issue becomes, and sorry, but I really agree with what Karen and CTU have said about a better day, not a longer day. There's lots of things. So in Lawrence, Massachusetts, we have a longer day, but it is, what's happening there is art, music, and lots of time for teachers to work together. So the places where extended time are working are not when it becomes more and more student time. The places, meaning more and more contact time between an individual teacher and students, the places where it's working is where you create more robustness. and where kids have more opportunities, and teachers, instead of being at home at 11 or 12 or 1 o'clock in the morning Skyping with each other, they're actually working together face-to-face in trying to, think about their lessons and what they're going to do the next day.
The moderator showing incredible restraint. We'll not deal with the first part with Mr. de Blasio, but that's okay. We follow him very closely. That's a different interpretation than what I've heard from my pals in New York. Okay, Nicholas Hahn, Real Clear Politics. Where are you? Coward's Eye. Let's see. Where are you? Raise your hand. Over here. All right. I know you're a brave lot. We know that. Why should students? Oh, Jesus. They're going to get easier. Trust me. Why should students be trapped in failing schools, discriminated against based upon their zip code? I'm reading them, Karen. Don't hurt the messenger.
So let me just with what the moderator said, no one in New York is shy. But if you look at what the big fights are, they're about testing instead of teaching, and they're about making sure that the governor didn't actually trample on local authority and local control. And that's what the fights have been in the last few weeks. I really am this question. When I see a question like that, this is what I think about, that I'm a really bad teacher. Because I obviously, after a question like that, I see that there is nothing that I just said that actually moved the person who asked the question. Because no one deserves a bad school. All schools should be great. And our job is to make sure that there are great neighborhood public schools. That's our job. Where kids can walk to, where parents have that as their first choice. And so when I see something like that, it's a false choice. Our job should be creating the equity and the opportunities and the strategies to make sure that every public school for every kid is a school that parents want to send their kids to, educators want to work in, and most importantly, kids can soar. And so we have to actually get under the hood and find out what's going on and why. And I'm not saying that there's never a time for a school to close, or if a school is underutilized, you can't deal with it. But think about this. 50 schools in this city have closed. We were at, in 1 year, we were just at this school, the name of the elementary school, Price, where we were at Price. Price had gone up. Their scores have gone up 2 years in a row, 12 and 13 points. The school was still closed. So you can't tell me that that's about academic achievement. When we keep, when we keep talking about growth, there are houses right across the street that are filled with young people and kids. Those kids are now bused 3 miles away. If they miss the bus, how do they get to school? So I think about all these neighborhoods throughout the country. In Philadelphia last year, there was a charter operator that said, I will give you another $1 million, parents, to bring your budget from $3 million to $4 million if you pick us as the charter school operator. And the parents said no in a secret ballot vote. And they said no because they want public schools. Not the false debate of what we have right now, but they want public schools that work for all of our children.
Okay. All right. We have a lot of questions, so try and narrow the answers. They won't all be that controversial. This is the City Club. If you want to hear niceties, go to the Union League. Okay? Yeah. Bob Grover, retired. I assume retired teacher. What can we learn from countries such as South Korea, Finland, and Japan to improve our educational system?
So we were just at the International Summit of Teaching and Learning, which is the 5th time they've had this summer, and it's education ministers, union leaders, OECD, the international teacher union organization called Education International. And we've actually, for the last 5 years, spent 2 or 3 days together to go through this kind of learning. So what we can learn from Japan is that Japan really focused on critical thinking and problem-based instruction. And in terms of trying to think about that kind of inquiry and trying to help its kids do that. What we're learning from China and from South Korea, and in some ways from some of the other, even from Singapore, is that even in China, they think what we do in North America, or excuse me, what we do in the United States, they raise their eyebrows at all of our testing and our fixation on testing instead of teaching. Now, I'm not saying that parents are not fixated on how well their kids do, and frankly, we've started talking about how there's too much pressure, too much parental pressure in places like South Korea in terms of how well their kids do on the 1 or 2, not the 17 or 18 annual tests that are given to kids. So, but what they focus on critical thinking. China actually focuses on equity. South Korea incredibly values their teachers. But who I would focus on are people like in Finland, where they actually think about the whole child. They actually think about how they prepare teachers, including with clinical and residency programs. They don't think about this on the back end, but they think about preparing teachers like we prepare doctors. And they actually, in many of these countries, they try to pay and respect teachers like the professionals they are. And in this last summit, we spent a lot of time talking about the whole issue about collaboration and how you create and seed teacher leaders.
We keep going. There's someone's about to visit us. All right. No, it's not Mayor de Blasio. Don't get worried. Rebecca Huffman, Democrats for Education Reform. Okay. Should we skip that question?
No, thank you.
I admire what a great moderator of reform you were. I assume she's referring to you. Tough crowd, Jay. In New York, and the UFT?
UFT.
Shall being a result of that approach. Do you see an opportunity for that approach in Chicago? Or does it really have to be all or nothing?
Look, I really believe that we have to find common ground as we also make sure that we stand on our principles. And there's lots of room to find common ground as one stands on principles. The dilemma is this: you can't try to extinguish the voice of teachers. And you can't close, the effects that have happened here and in Philadelphia and in places like New York, where there's been wholesale closing of community schools, has really left neighborhoods in despair and has left neighborhoods with school deserts. And if you just have to walk around and talk to, I started crying this morning talking with Jitu about and walking through this neighborhood. Of course it's going to make you angry. You have to listen to people and see what's going on and not just ignore them. And that's what I think happens a lot in terms of Chicago. I saw it happen a lot in terms of Philadelphia, where the same soundbite gets said over and over again, ignoring the reality of people's lives And so that's my plea. I can be as intense a street fighter as anybody. But if this is about helping all our kids, then we need to actually be all in and listen to the people who know what they're talking about and people in communities who have the same exact aspiration for their children and themselves as everybody in this room.
All right. Hopefully I picked a good one for you. Susan Kerbo, Polk Brothers Foundation. Chicago has more than 100 full-service community schools. Please save time to visit a few the next time you're here.
Deal.
Good. Is that all right, Karen? All right. You know, during the 40s, it was clear with Sydney, with FDR. Now it's clear with him. No one knows about that. It's just, sorry. Andrew Broy, Illinois Network of Charter Schools. Okay, here we go. Would you recommend, skip that question, no. Would you recommend the CTV? CTU. I heard of them. Take on the challenge of opening up a charter school like the New York Union did? Pretty interesting question. Go ahead.
All right, so we opened 2 charters when I was the president of the city of the UFT, and I co-chaired the opening of the 3rd. The one that we opened in the South Bronx, that's now called UniPrep, has done, with all due respect, better than most of the other charters and most of the other public schools in New York. It doesn't get any publicity whatsoever because it's contrary to the narrative. But it is in Michael Bloomberg's grading system, which frankly I would not embrace, but in a test-based grading system, it was the 4th best school, high school in New York for 3 or 4 years in running. And it's because the school was very collaboratively based. It's run through committees. Teachers get paid about 10 or 15% more than in the other schools in the city. But most importantly, there's a real focus on collaboration. There's lower class size, and there's a real focus on teaching and learning, not on testing. The other school that we started, the high school's doing pretty well. The elementary school we're closing. And we're closing the elementary school because we made a decision not to expel kids. We have a lot of special needs kids, and the special needs kids did not do as well on tests as other kids. And so parents love the school. They're upset that we're closing it. But ultimately, in terms of the state accountability system, it's not measuring up to that system. And so the answer, I decided to give you this as a prelude, because there are some teacher-led schools that are terrific. There are some teacher-led schools that have problems. The real issue is that there's not one silver bullet that solves things in education. You got to do a bunch of things together. It requires equity in terms of resources, it requires really good strategy, and it requires really good management. But it comes into 3 real buckets. How do you build the capacity of your education force? How do you have an engaged curriculum? How do you actually meet the needs of all children, including wraparound services? And so you have to do all of those things at the same time. And the real thing that we have to figure out is how, when we see good practice, how we sustain it in a transformational kind of way so that we can build on that.
We have a few more questions, but we're going to skip those questions because we have a mystery guest. Will the mystery guest please sign in, please?